So in preceding posts, I've been talking about obsessive-compulsive disorder and the nature of obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions are unwelcome, intrusive thoughts or images or ideas that come without any effort or desire on our part, and they cause us anxiety, right? Things like, maybe I hit somebody with the car back there, or, what if someone breaks in while I'm away? Or, did I leave the stove on? We don't really have much control at all about whether an obsessive thought occurs to us. And to some extent, trying to stop them makes them worse. Not thinking about a pink elephant. Compulsions are things we do to try to get rid of the anxiety that's most often brought on by the obsessions. So they're voluntary to at least some degree. They're a coping strategy. I'm worried about intruders, so I'm checking the door. And once I've checked it to my satisfaction, I feel better. I'm usually trying to bring about that nice feeling of just rightness. And that's not bad. But in OCD, the behavior that we do is usually not too helpful from a realistic perspective. You're checking that door 3 times. You know how to lock doors. See, you probably had it right the first time. The additional checks, not necessary. And sometimes the behavior has no real relationship to what happens. You stand on 1 foot for a minute to make sure that your mother doesn't get cancer. There's no relationship between those things. As well, these types of rituals tend to get bigger with time. When we do them, we get the reward of less anxiety. And behavior that gets rewarded tends to be repeated and tends to grow. So these rituals can get so involved that they disable us. It takes 1.5 hours to shower and 2 hours to lock up the house. So how do we treat OCD? Well, there are many strategies, too many to cover here, and all of them are too complicated to cover in detail. If you want treatment for OCD, you need to see someone personally who treats OCD. YouTube is not therapy. But I can talk about some of the most common strategies, and today I'll focus on the most widely used one of them all: exposure and response prevention, also known as ERP. Now let's consider a model for understanding what's going on. First, we got a trigger. Often an OCD episode gets rolling in response to some particular situation, like seeing the color green, or leaving home for the day, or having a messy kitchen. This triggers an obsessive or intrusive thought, like, what if someone breaks in while I'm out? This makes us anxious. The anxiety motivates us to do something to reduce it. And we've discovered that when we engage in a particular ritual, we feel better. So we do that. Maybe we do our lock the door ritual 5 times, counting every time we do it. And sure enough, this reduces the anxiety, and we do feel better. But this also intensifies the link between the trigger and the obsession. So in the long run, we get the obsessive thought more frequently. So in therapy, we need to break this circle. And where we do it is here. Again, we cannot stop the obsessions, at least not directly. We need to work where we have some degree of voluntary control, and that is with the compulsions. So what do? Well, let's take the example of our door locking guy. He's going to leave home in the morning, and that's his trigger. We know that's going to give him the thought that someone might break in. Maybe it'll be really obvious, that thought, or maybe it'll just be a feeling of uneasiness, bumps up his anxiety a bit. So we're going to create a new rule. It's tempting to say, you're not allowed to lock the door more than once. But that's too much. It's beyond him, right? He's been doing this ritual for years. He can't just stop. So instead, we might change it to a new ritual. And usually, it's a slightly less elaborate one. So, stop, lock the door, and count 1, just like you usually do. Then do it again, and again, and again. That's 4. this point, it doesn't quite feel right. You don't have that feeling of just rightness, but we're going to do without it. Turn around, walk to your car, drive to work, right? You didn't do the fifth one, but you're going to go away anyway. Now, he hasn't done the ritual right, so at least some of that anxiety is still there. And as he drives off, it gets stronger. And along with it will come an idea. If I don't go back and do that fifth check, my anxiety is just going to get worse and worse and worse until, I don't know, my head explodes, or until I can't stand it and I have to turn around or leave my meeting and go drive home. But what he's going to discover is that eventually that anxiety peaks and goes back down again. 2 hours into his workday, he's forgotten about the door. It's not on his mind. We can get him to do this for a week, and then we'll change the ritual again. 3 checks, not 4. Now, this is mimicking how the ritual got set up in the first place. He didn't one day start with 5 checks. It built up. We're winding it back the same way. So, exposure and response prevention. We're exposing him to the trigger, leaving home, and to the obsessive thought, right? Somebody might break in, and to the anxiety. He has a usual response to that, his 5-check ritual, so we are response prevention, preventing that response. So we substitute it with another response instead, usually, again, a less elaborate one. Now, you would think that going from 4 checks to 3 would be harder than from 5 to 4. Not usually, because he's only been doing the 4 checks for 1 week. It isn't that rigid a ritual yet. So once we start monkeying with the ritual, it usually gets a bit easier and easier to trim it even more. But it feels like it's going to get harder and harder and harder, doesn't it? Now, this implies something. We could take a 20-minute ritual and replace it with a slightly different 20-minute ritual, just as long, still just as elaborate, but a little different, and this should weaken it. And sometimes we do exactly that. Take someone who has a shower ritual to make sure that he washes every part of himself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and so on, right? We could say, I want you to do exactly that, but instead of left to right, right to left, right? We're not going to drop anything. We're going to do the same number, just a different order. That may be enough to loosen it up, and then subsequent changes get easier. So with our locks guy, we'll work it down step by step to something more reasonable that he himself agrees with. I'm a grown-up. I know how to lock doors, so lock it once and walk away, and don't go back. With our shower guy, we might discuss it and settle on only counting fingers, maybe, not the spaces between the fingers. Or you wash between your fingers just by lacing them, and just once. And we might even experiment eventually with not washing his left arm at all and just ending the shower. No shower till next day. See what happens. Because we've broken the cycle of OCD, it gets weaker and weaker. Now, frankly, I love treating OCD because it's so workable and it's so surprising to the person who has it. They think it's going to get harder and harder and harder. Instead, it usually gets easier and easier. And eventually they'll say things like, oh, I went shopping. I didn't even think about whether I'd locked the door. I came back and I had, of course. People would say, oh, I forgot to say the prayer 10 times. I went on holiday and I forgot to unplug all my appliances. I left the book a little crooked on my coffee table and I didn't move it. Too much bother. It's wonderful. The fear that they often have is that they're going to become complete flakes. I'm going to wander off and not lock up at all. I'm going to leave rotten chicken juice all over the counter forever. My fly is always going to be down. Never seems to happen. These are cautious people. We don't need to get rid of that. We just need to make it reasonable caution, not pointless ritual. Okay, how do we do it with the bad thought people? You know, the ones who have the thought of mom in hospital and they need to undo it. Those thoughts tend to come without warning. Well, in some cases, we'll have them deliberately bring up the bad thought, mom in hospital, right? While they're doing something, like, say, drinking some water, mom in hospital, and then response prevention. That's it. No undoing. They're not allowed any more water. No prayers, no creating the perfect image and drinking more water. Leave it undone. You can see what the effect will be. People do the ritual to produce the just right feeling. What we're doing is deliberately bringing on the just wrong feeling and letting it stay there without doing anything to get rid of it. With time, that feeling goes away all on its own. The key to ERP, exposure and response prevention, is the structure. It is not enough to resist just once, or to try to undo all your rituals, or do it one day and not the next. We have to pick and choose. We have to pick a mission and work on it, leaving all the other rituals to keep going for now. And we have to be very specific about what the new mission is, like 4 checks, or showering right to left, or going to 7-Eleven with your microwave oven plugged in, or wearing mismatched socks to work. Randomly changing improv ERP does not work. Structured ERP usually does. That's one reason why it helps to be working with a coach-like therapist trained in it. And it's not enough to understand the technique. The person has to actually do it to get any benefit. So that's ERP. And for some clients, it's 90% of the work in OCD treatment. There are other bits and pieces, but ERP is the core. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes patience, but it can be immensely effective. Thanks for watching.